Welcome to Road to the Draft. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. We are just 2 weeks away from the draft. We always get to this point and it's like, man, we've been talking about this for so long in conjunction with free agency and everything, but things change so much can happen, who you sign, who you lose. Now we're just 2 weeks out. Is this where you start to see a little bit more coalescing in that first round? Yes, I like being able to use those big words.
Yeah, well, we call this the Road to the Draft and we've been on it for almost 2 months at this point.
Yeah,
and
long road trip.
We've talked about a lot of different players because, at least in the mock drafts, you don't know what's really going on in the actual draft rooms of the Bucs, or other teams. But at least in the mock drafts, there's things develop and guys go up and down the board and you sign players in free agency that may affect what you want in the draft. But now that we're getting close, and last week we talked about the second round just because we wanted to show there's more to the draft in the first round, but as we're getting close now, go back to the first round, kind of look back, see how things are starting to, you said coalescing, the trends that are becoming more common, and that's the type of players that we want to talk about today, starting with Darnell Wright, a tackle from Tennessee. So I think we talked about him maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, really showing up in tons of mock drafts for the Buccaneers, probably a right tackle, which would involve moving Tristan Wirfs to the left side, which the Buccaneers have talked about doing. They've actually talked about doing that for years, that they might eventually do that. So just a guy that probably could start day one. He would come in and then you could probably play Luke Gedeke at one of the guard spots because Coach Bowles has said that Luke is going to be somewhere, whether it's tackle or guard, they haven't decided yet. So a guy that probably would come in and start right away at right tackle, and the Buccaneers don't have a lot of experienced players for the tackle positions right now.
And I know that linebacker's been an interesting point to discuss this offseason because you did re-sign Lavonte David, so you have Lavonte and Devin coming back there, but then there's not necessarily part of, as we talked about when Lavonte, we weren't sure if he was coming back, is what else do you have there? It's a position maybe you need some depth or looking forward to the future as well, and then edge as well, that kind of whole linebacker to edge position. What do you feel like those two areas look like of a need, and how you see maybe some of these players in the draft who could be one or both of them?
I like the way that you bring up Lavonte there because I do think the Buccaneers need to think for the future in terms of their inside linebacker position because, as you said, both Devin White and Lavonte this is the last years on their current contracts, and you have to think about moving on potentially from one or both of them. And I think at some point we talked about Drew Sanders of Arkansas, but I think inside linebacker, as we've watched the mock drafts develop, has kind of been a position that isn't going in the first round. So that's maybe something you could do in the second round, like the Bucs did with Lavonte David 10 years ago, 11 years ago. One of the best draft picks in Bucs history. But edge, that's a position the Buccaneers could possibly address at number 19. And the guy that we've talked about before is Nolan Smith of Georgia. Really unbelievably athletic. He blew away the combine, just incredible numbers, and that has really risen his draft stock. So he may or may not be available at 19. But smaller guy, probably about 248, which is, on the small end of an edge rusher. But even though he's a smaller guy, he's actually done quite well against the run, at least at Georgia. So he's a guy that a lot of scouts are very excited about just because of the athletic traits. And I'd be very interested if the Bucs could add him. Again, at these positions we're talking about, we talked about tackle, now we're talking about edge. There are positions where the Buccaneers need numbers. I mean, Shaq's coming back from an injury. You got Joe Tryon-Shenka. You haven't re-signed Carl Nassib at this point. You did re-sign Anthony Nelson, but you just can't have enough edge rushers, and that's something that Todd Bowles has talked about several times this offseason.
And as we've talked about things coming into focus where you start hearing certain names over and over, I feel like Brian Branch.
Yeah.
This is the name.
Which I love, by the way.
Yeah, this is a name that you hear over and over again. So where do you feel like
so many
fit on this team?
In fact, this week on Buccaneers.com, Brianna Dix did our mock draft, and that's who she gave us.
Well, look at that.
She actually did a full, check it out on the website, she did all the Bucs picks, 9 picks over 7 rounds, but in the first round, she gave us Alabama, I'll call him defensive back, and also, as you can see here, a kick returner, which would be kind of cool. I'll call him a defensive back because he can play safety, but what he might be most valuable for the Buccaneers would be in the slot, because Antoine Winfield Jr. is going to play just solely free safety this year, according to Coach Bowles. You have Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean holding down the outside spots. Who's your slot? And we asked Coach Bowles about that at the league meeting last week, and he said they have a few guys on the roster that could play that, like maybe D. Delaney, but that could be something that they add. and there's not necessarily a number one answer for that right now. And Brian Branch could come in right away and just play in the slot, and also give you the versatility that he could play safety.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Road to the Draft. Again, we are just a couple weeks away, so make sure you stay tuned to all the draft coverage right here on Buccaneers.com.